If you're a big fan of Elder Scrolls lore, then you would probably know that there has been a huge amount of conflict between the various provinces and political factions of Tamriel. There have been wars upon wars throughout history, so many in fact that by the time of Skyrim, some of the most significant ones are seldom talked about or even remembered by those races who have lived long enough to experience them. On Fudge Muppet, we've explored the rising and falling of many empires and the expansions and defeats of the Aldmeri Dominions. The Aldmeri Dominion currently controls much of Tamriel, although at one point the Empire conquered the entirety of Tamriel under the command of Tiber Septim. We also made a video called Are Argonians Weak, where we analysed just about every instance of Argonian participation throughout military history to uncover the truth. These are things that we now know about, but what if I told you that there was actually a wood elf who tried to conquer Tamriel, a Bosmer from Valemwood who wanted nothing more than power and slaughter, an arcane individual who got really far in his aim? What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? My name is Michael and welcome to Fudge Muppet. Today I'm very excited to bring you a sensational lore video regarding a wood elf of many names, Camoran, also known as the Camoran Usurper and the Hart King. I really like this story. So firstly, let's quickly go over who the Camoran dynasty are so that we can grasp where the Camoran Usurper fits into the picture. In a nutshell, they're a bloodline that has ruled Valemwood for much of its history. The dynasty was founded by King Eplir long ago at the beginning of the First Era, and I really mean the beginning. Believe it or not, this significant event was actually the event which was regarded as starting the year zero of the First Era. Eplir successfully united the Bosmer together as one, and considering that these Bosmer were of course innately wild, many people consider this event to be one of the greatest military accomplishments on Tamriel's timeline. I don't know if I would personally go as far as saying that, but it's pretty damn impressive nonetheless. The Camorans then ruled over Valemwood for hundreds and hundreds of years after the Wood Elves were united by King Eplir, and they even managed to keep the Elysian Empire at bay, who were trying to expand their dominance so brutally at the time. Valemwood was then conquered in the 2714th year of the First Era by the Second Empire, after the province had been so weakened by the Thracian Plague. Obviously, the Camorans weren't wiped out, but their influence was smashed by the Empire. The Empire even gave independence to some Wood Elves who were not Camorans and were considered lesser nobles. As you'd know from our videos on the Empire, this Second Empire fell in the 430th year of the Second Era, and you'd think this would be the perfect time for the Camorans to re-establish their control. They also thought this, although they weren't too successful. So much damage had been done, and the province which was once unified had now fallen apart, both politically and also culturally. The province had a lot of infighting because of this, and during 400 or so years of the interregnum, the Camorans achieved a united rule just twice, and due to becoming a member of the First and Second Aldmeri Dominion. Throughout the years, many quarrels over the succession of the Camoran throne occurred. There were many Camoran heirs vying for power, but eventually Tiber Septim swept it all away, conquering Tamriel under the Third Empire. So now you have a decent understanding of who the Camoran dynasty are and what they've done. Here is where things get interesting, and this Bosmer warlord would eventually come into action. So during the Third Era, Valemwood was ruled by the Third Empire. However, the Camoran dynasty still kind of ruled the province in the sense that they were allowed to act as figurehead monarchs, and they retained their grasp on the throne. But then in the 249th year of the Third Era, arguments over the Camoran succession arose again, but this time things got way out of hand. So out of hand actually that it broke out into a multi-province war that threatened the very existence of the Empire. Along came a male wood elf by the name of Camoran Kaltos. Kaltos is said by some to be one of the best tacticians of the Valemwood military, and he was one of the claimants to the throne. He also happened to be on very good terms with another claimant, Haemon, the Hart King himself, who would soon become the Camoran Usurper, and who this video is about. So Kaltos and Haemon began to work together, and they also had help from Kaltos' chief scout named Orban Elmlock. Haemon was a very talented and powerful sorcerer, and together with Kaltos, they planned to take over all of Valemwood, kicking out the Empire and claiming the Camoran throne for themselves. Kaltos would sit upon this throne, while Haemon would be his sorcerer and advisor, while Orban the scout would obviously find himself in a high position of success too. And so for the next 2 years, Kaltos and Haemon fought their way through Valemwood, smashing apart their foes. It may sound mean, but it was war, and warlike conflict is always as such. Interestingly, however, Kaltos was very adamant that those who were not a threat should not be hurt. They weren't in the business of unnecessary bloodshed. After all, they wanted to be ruling a prosperous nation when they were done. They just wanted to take out the others who stood in their way, who also were vying for power. After 2 years had passed, Kaltos and Haemon had taken over just about all of Valemwood, and had had ripped away the grasp of the Empire. They had conquered Falanesti, the great city tree, and assumed control of the throne. Valenwood was theirs now, and Kautos was very pleased to be in control, hoping to bring prosperity back to Valenwood as the new leader of the Camoran dynasty and the Bosma province. But remember how I said Kautos wanted to make sure that there were no unnecessary casualties? Well, his advisor and sorcerer, Haemon, was much more ruthless, and it was his merciless and tyrannical attitude that would ultimately ruin the bond between these two claimants. You would think that after gaining control of Valenwood that would be enough, but not for Haemon, who would go on to become known as the Hart King. Haemon betrayed Kautos, claiming the throne for himself and leading their armies north. Now Kautos was forced to flee, and this takeover of the throne is why Haemon became known as the Camoran usurper. He declared war on Clovia, marching his forces into Cyrodiil and attacking western Tamriel for nearly 20 years. He absolutely ravaged the continent and notably wiped out the city of Kvatch, killing all of the people who lived there. All of this went against Kautos' plans, and it is said that Kautos spent the next 15 years of his life working against Haemon, trying to prevent more slaughter. Sadly for him, the Camoran usurper didn't just decimate parts of Cyrodiil. He actually did so well that he drove his forces through Hammerfell and into High Rock. His armies were made up of Bosma warriors, plenty of mercenaries, and also some undead and Daedra. It's not fully understood how much of his army was comprised of Daedra and undead, while some believe this aspect to be a myth, while others believe it to be a real result of his powerful sorcery skills. I mean, this guy was a good sorcerer, and we know that other mages throughout history have been able to conjure hefty amounts of Daedra and undead through various methods. One theory suggests he would attack places with some of his forces and these summoned Daedra and undead, and then he would slowly replace all the abominations with mercenaries and move on to the next place. Either way, the usurper's army spread through the west side of Tamriel. He had conquered Valenwood and sacked parts of Cyrodiil, and now conquered huge amounts of Hammerfell, defeating the kingdoms of Tanith and Rehad. These cities requested help from Elenhir to fight against Haemon, but their cries were denied. Tanith and Rehad were of the Forebears faction, and we know the Forebears and the Crowns are rivals. It is of no surprise that Elenhir, a crown city, turned their back to the Forebears. The Crowns would feel the sting in return, however, when the Forebear cities refused to help them when the Nords of Skyrim attacked them during the War of Bendermark, taking Elenhir. At the time when the usurper was causing so much pain for Tamriel, the Empire was facing multiple problems. One of them included the Emperor being busy in a war of succession against his own cousin. To do something to help the Red Guards, the Emperor tried sending forces to Hammerfell to help them fight off Haemon, but this was not successful. Some of these Imperial forces were said to be bribed into joining the usurper, strengthening his forces. Others are said to have been turned into more members of the undead part of the army, and some were simply slain. The usurper was actually rumored by some to be a lich himself, but I don't know how true that is. South Hammerfell was now under control of the Hart King, and the event was known as the Battle of Dragontooth. It took him 13 years to conquer most of Hammerfell. The Hart King continued to march north, the Bosma sorcerer now spilling his forces into High Rock. Fear was a big weapon of his, and he was considered by most he attacked to be unstoppable. Few forces could fend off his bloody onslaught, and after every month of death that passed, even less people even tried to fight back. Who would want to die? After all this conquer, next came High Rock. His gaze was fixed on the homeland of the Bretons, and decided it would be the next best place to wipe out and control. This should be easy, as by this time in the 266th year of the Third Era, the Iliac Bay region had no clear leaders who could unite the multitude of small states who so often disagreed with each other. Interestingly, many of High Rock's rulers actually had secret alliances with Haemon, agreeing to provide no opposition towards him in return for the protection of their lands after he gains control. This led to the initial resistance against Haemon being quite weak. Throw in the fact that people were already annoyed at the Empire at the time, and that to some, the usurper was almost seen as a kind of liberator from the Empire. Things were not looking too good. That said, 1 year later, in 267, an alliance was finally formed, due to the fact that word finally spread about the true nature of the Camoran usurper. He was a cruel and vindictive sorcerer, and he abused the citizens in the lands he conquered. The alliance was formed between the territories of Yakalan, Phrygius, Cambria, and Dwynen. This was led by Baron Othrock of Dwynen, and these combined High Rock forces then joined with the forces of Camoran Kautos, who had come to help them, creating a massive navy force and a powerful land force too. A gnarly battle between these High Rock forces and the usurper, known as the Battle of Fire Waves, occurred, both on the land and around the sea of Dwynen. Luckily, the weather worked against the usurper, and his forces were ultimately defeated, with the Hart King himself slain. It had almost been 20 years of chaos before this wood elf was taken down, but by Talos did he get far. It's interesting to consider that a wood elf did all of this, as you don't often hear of the Bosma pulling off these continent-scale events. Only now could Kaltos finally give out a sigh of relief, although so much damage had already been done. Kaltos was disgusted and horrified by the events ever since he was betrayed, and couldn't believe the horrors his ex-advisor had committed. He had begged and wept for Haemon to return to Valenwood, but the powerful sorcerer hadn't listened. The chief scout, Orban Elmlock, was actually in Dwynen when Haemon Camoran was finally defeated. One of the impacts of Haemon's defeat that lasted quite a while was the continuation of reduced sympathies towards the Empire. You see, the defeat of the usurper was accomplished without the Emperor's help, and the efforts he did commit to failed. As a result, the west of Tamriel began to view the Empire in a more negative light, seeing them as incompetent and weak. On the other side of this, the smaller regions which had come together to form an alliance had been victorious, and this actually promoted separatism and patriotism while boosting the prestige of the local rulers drastically. While this may have been the case, I can't help but think that it just shows that if you come together and unite, only then will you succeed. But either way, that is the story of the Wood Elf Warlord who tried to conquer Tamriel. Thank you guys so much for watching the video, and if you did enjoy it, be sure to leave a like, and if you're new and want more, definitely subscribe. If you want to keep up with us on social media, the links are in the description, and with that said, my name is Michael. Thank you so much again for watching this video, and I look forward to nerding out with you again very soon.